They said Filipino kids are bad in English. They said it in classrooms, whispered between desks, and written in red ink across notebooks. They said it online, hidden behind usernames and comments that felt brave because no face was attached. They said it in jokes, said it with smiles, said it in tones that sounded harmless, but cut deep. They said English is not their strength. They struggle with grammar. They have accents. They can't compete on a global level. They said it so often that it stopped sounding like opinion and started sounding like truth. And for a long time, the world believed it. Teachers lowered expectations. Judges raised eyebrows. Audiences listened halfway, already waiting for mistakes. But this story is about one Filipino child who heard those words, felt their weight pressed down on the chest, and still chose to stand up. This is the story of how one voice challenged a belief, broke a stereotype, shocked a room full of doubters, and made history. Not by sounding perfect, but by being real. In a small town in the Philippines, where mornings smelled like freshly cooked rice and rain-soaked roads, there lived a child like many others. The kind of town where neighbors knew each other's names, where roosters acted like alarm clocks, where power sometimes went out at night, and candles became homework lamps. There was no big house with tall gates, no fancy school with air-conditioned classrooms, no private tutors trained overseas, just a regular kid, a simple life, and a dream no one around took seriously. At school, English class was often the hardest part of the day. The words felt unfamiliar, like puzzles missing pieces. The rules felt strict, complicated, and unforgiving, and every mistake felt louder than it really was. When the child stood up to read out loud, the room sometimes filled with soft laughter. Not cruel laughter, not angry laughter, just careless laughter, the kind that people don't think twice about, the kind that stays with you long after the bell rings. The teacher corrected gently, with patience and kindness. But the silence after each correction felt heavier than shouting. Because silence makes you think, and thinking makes doubt grow. At home, things were not much easier. No one spoke perfect English. No one could explain grammar rules clearly. There was no quiet study room with a desk facing a window. Just a small table, shared space, background noise, and limited time. But there was something else. Something powerful, a fire. Every night after homework was done and chores were finished, the child would read. Slowly, carefully, word by word. Stories borrowed from school, speeches found online, poems written by people the child had never met. Sometimes out loud, mispronouncing words but trying anyway. Sometimes in whispers, afraid of being heard, but determined to understand. Not to sound perfect, not to sound foreign, but to understand, because deep inside, this child believed something many people around did not. That English was not about copying an accent. It was not about sounding like someone else. It was about being understood. Outside the Philippines, the stereotypes were louder. People said Filipino kids memorize, but don't express. They said they repeat, but don't think. They said they can speak, but not impress. They said English belongs to certain countries, certain schools, certain voices, and when international competitions were announced, assumptions were already made. The winners would come from big countries, rich countries, English-first countries, places with debate clubs, speech coaches, and years of training. No one was watching the Philippines. No one, except this child. When the announcement came about an international English competition, it sounded unreal. The competition was global, students from different countries, judges from respected institutions. Standards set high, very high. The school hesitated, the teachers doubted. Even friends asked carefully, "Are you sure you want to try?" Because failure felt likely. Embarrassment felt possible, and disappointment felt close enough to touch. But the child didn't hear fear in those questions. The child heard a challenge. Preparation began. There were no expensive programs, no elite coaches, no shortcuts, just effort. Morning practice before school, eyes still heavy with sleep. Afternoon practice after classes, when others went home to rest. Late night practice, when the house was quiet and doubts got loud. Writing essays again and again, reading speeches until the words felt familiar, speaking in front of mirrors, watching lips move, listening carefully, correcting mistakes again and again and again. Sometimes the child cried, frustrated and tired. Sometimes the child wanted to quit, wondering if everyone else was right. Sometimes the words refused to come out right, no matter how hard they were practiced. But every time doubt appeared, another thought rose stronger. If I don't try, they will always be right. And that thought pushed the child forward. The day of the competition arrived. The venue was big, too big. Tall ceilings, bright lights, flags from different countries hanging side by side. Children spoke English confidently, voices smooth and practiced. Accents sounded powerful, familiar to judges. Laughter echoed freely without fear. The Filipino child felt small. Hands trembled, heart raced. The voice felt trapped somewhere between the chest and the throat. And then it happened. Someone nearby laughed. Not directly at the child, but at the accent. That laugh carried years of mockery, years of stereotypes, years of quiet shame. For a moment, everything stopped. The noise faded, the room blurred, and then the child remembered home. The small table, the late nights, the whispered practice, the belief no one else seemed to hold. And something changed. When it was time to speak, the room grew quiet. The child walked to the front. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The microphone felt cold in the hands. The lights felt too bright. The judges watched closely, pens ready. And then, the child spoke. Not with perfect grammar, not with borrowed pronunciation, but with truth. The voice was clear. The words were honest. The message came from experience, not textbooks. The story spoke of struggle, of identity, of being underestimated, of learning to believe in yourself when the world doesn't. Every sentence landed, every pause mattered. The accent didn't disappear, but it didn't matter, because the room was listening. Really listening. Some judges leaned forward. Some stopped writing, some simply stared. Because this was not rehearsed English, this was lived English. As the speech continued, something incredible happened. The room changed. People stopped comparing, stopped counting mistakes, stopped waiting for failure. They started feeling. The words painted pictures of classrooms and quiet homes. The message reached hearts that were not expecting to be moved. The confidence grew stronger with every line spoken. And when the final sentence was delivered, there was silence. Not awkward silence, not confused silence. Respectful silence, then applause. Slow at first, then louder. Then rising until everyone stood. The Filipino child stood still, heart pounding, unsure if this moment was real. Results were announced later. Names were called. Countries were mentioned. Second place, first runner-up, and then the winner. The room went quiet again. A Filipino name echoed across the hall. For a second, no one moved. Then reality hit. The Filipino child had won. An international award in English. History was made. News spread fast. Headlines shifted. Comments exploded. People who once doubted grew quiet. They didn't expect this. How did this happen? A Filipino child? Yes, a Filipino child. Back home, the community celebrated. Teachers cried. Family members held each other tightly. Not because of fame, but because of validation. Because one child proved something powerful. That intelligence has no accent. That brilliance does not belong to one country. That English does not belong to a single voice. But the story didn't end there. The award opened doors, invitations arrived, interviews followed, and every time the child spoke, the message stayed the same. I am not special, I am not different. I am just proof. Proof that Filipino kids are not bad in English. They were just never given credit. Proof that confidence matters more than perfection. Proof that being understood matters more than sounding foreign. Today that child is older, stronger, still learning. But the impact remains. Somewhere in the Philippines, another child is reading out loud. Another child is being laughed at. Another child is doubting themselves. And this story reaches them. And they think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. They said Filipino kids are bad in English. They were wrong. They just hadn't listened yet. And now, the world is listening.